I never believed in the paranormal, ghosts, spirits, and all that. Just stories to scare children, or so I thought. That was until I moved into the old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The place was a fixer-upper, sure, but it had character, and I was drawn to its isolated charm. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and at night, the only sounds were the whispers of the wind through the trees and the occasional creak of the house settling. It was peaceful at first. The first few nights passed without incident. I spent my days working on repairs and my evenings unwinding with a book or a glass of wine. The house had its quirks, cold spots, doors that seemed to close on their own, but nothing out of the ordinary for a place that old. Then, about a week in, I started waking up at 3 a.m. on the dot, every single night. At first, I brushed it off as stress. Moving to a new place, living alone for the first time, it made sense that I wasn't sleeping well. But then, the shadows started. It began with fleeting glimpses out of the corner of my eye. I'd be reading in the living room, and I'd catch a dark shape darting across the hallway. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the long hours of work were playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something was off. The shadows grew bolder as the days went by. They lingered longer, and I could see them more clearly. They weren't just tricks of the light. These were figures, humanoid shapes made of pure darkness. They had no features, no eyes or mouths, just the vague outline of a head and shoulders, and they were watching me. One night, I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I felt it, a heavy presence in the room. My eyes snapped open, and there, at the foot of my bed, was a shadow. It was taller than the others I'd seen, more defined. It stood there, unmoving, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare back, paralyzed with fear. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the air thick and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. The shadow began to move, slowly, deliberately, creeping closer to the side of the bed. I could feel its coldness radiating through the room, chilling me to the bone. In a desperate attempt to break free from the terror, I forced myself to close my eyes. I told myself it wasn't real, that if I ignored it, it would go away. Minutes passed, each one dragging on like an eternity. When I finally mustered the courage to open my eyes again, the shadow was gone. But the feeling of dread lingered, heavy and oppressive. That night marked the beginning of a relentless torment. The shadows were no longer content with lurking in the corners. They followed me, always just out of reach, but close enough to remind me that I was never alone. During the day, I could almost convince myself that I was imagining it all. But at night, when the darkness closed in, there was no denying their presence. I started sleeping with the lights on, but that didn't stop them. The shadows would find the darkest corners of the room, watching me with an unsettling patience. My once peaceful home had become a prison, and I was its unwilling captive. Then came the night that pushed me over the edge. I was dozing on the couch, too afraid to sleep in my bed, when I felt a sudden, crushing weight on my chest. I opened my eyes to see a shadow looming above me, its dark form blocking out the dim light from the lamp. I couldn't move or even scream. It was as if the shadow was sucking the very breath from me. In that moment, I knew these shadows were more than just figments of my imagination. They were real, and they wanted something from me. I knew I had to get out, but that farm, that house, was all I had. Feeling trapped and desperate, I decided to visit my parents for a couple of weeks. I needed to escape, even if just for a little while. I don't know what the future holds or how long I can keep running, but one thing is certain. Some places are marked by things we can't understand, and no matter how far we go, some shadows never really leave us. And maybe, just maybe, they aren't tied to the house at all. Maybe they're tied to us. I've always been a night owl. Something about the stillness of the late hours calms me. It's when I do my best thinking, my best work. That's why, when I took the night shift as a security guard at the old mall, it didn't bother me. The building was massive, a relic from the early 20th century that had been shut down for years. It was eerie, sure, but I didn't mind. In fact, I welcomed the solitude. The old mall was waiting to be demolished, but I guess there were still some valuables inside waiting to be taken out. Its once busy halls were now lined with dusty boxes and forgotten furniture. My job was simple: make rounds every couple of hours, ensure the place was secure, and keep an eye on the monitors. Easy money for a few hours of work, and I got to be alone with my thoughts. Or so I thought. The first couple of nights were uneventful. The building was silent except for the occasional creak of old pipes or the distant hum of the ancient heating system. I'd walk through the darkened corridors, my flashlight casting long, flickering shadows on the peeling walls, and I'd imagine what the place must have been like when it was still bustling with shoppers. But that was all in my head, or at least I told myself it was. Then, one night, things started to change. The air in the corridor felt different, thicker, heavier. There was a smell, too, faint, but unmistakable, like something old, rotten, mixed with something sour. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned a corner, and that's when I saw it. Just a flicker at first, at the edge of my vision. A shadow, darker than the surrounding gloom, moving along the wall. I stopped, heart pounding, and swung my flashlight towards it. Nothing. Just the empty hallway, the beam of light revealing nothing out of the ordinary. I laughed at myself for being so jumpy, and continued on, but that sense of unease clung to me like a second skin. Over the next few nights, the shadows became more persistent. I'd see them out of the corner of my eye, always just a step ahead, slipping out of sight whenever I turned to look. They weren't just ordinary shadows. There was something off about them. They moved with intent, with purpose, and they seemed to be following me. I started to dread my rounds. It was the same every time. That oppressive atmosphere, the nauseating smell, and the shadows that seemed to multiply, creeping closer, lingering longer. I began to feel like I wasn't alone in the building anymore, like there was something, or someone, there with me, watching me, waiting. One night, as I made my way down the hall, I felt a cold draft brush past me, even though there were no open windows, no source for the wind. I shivered, and that's when I heard it. A faint whisper, so soft I almost didn't catch it. It was coming from behind me. Slowly I turned, my flashlight shaking in my hand. At the far end of the corridor, I saw them, several shadows, darker than pitch, standing in a row. They had no faces, no features, just the vague outline of human figures, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold and unblinking. My heart raced, my mouth went dry, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, as if their gaze held me captive. The whispers grew louder, filling the space around me, incomprehensible and yet somehow filled with malice. The shadows began to move, gliding towards me without a sound. Panic surged through me, breaking the spell, and I turned and ran, not stopping, until I was out of that wing. The door slammed shut behind me. I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, my mind racing. What had I just seen? What were they? I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, that the isolation and the dark were playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew it was something more. They started appearing everywhere, in the stairwells, in the lobby, even in the security office where I monitored the cameras. They were always just out of reach, just at the edge of the light, but they were there, watching, waiting. One night, while reviewing the security footage, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the screen, was a shadow, clearer than ever before, moving through the hallway. But this time, it wasn't just a shadow. It was more defined, almost solid, and it wasn't alone. I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, I handed in my resignation. Whatever was in that mall, whatever those shadows were, I wanted no part of it. I later passed by and saw it being demolished. I wonder if the shadows were buried under the ruins, or if the walls of the mall were holding them in. I always thought of myself as a rational person. I grew up surrounded by the hustle and bustle of city life. There was no room for superstitions or ghost stories in my world, just the practicalities of everyday life. But now, as I sit here, typing, trying to make sense of everything that's been happening to me, I'm not so sure anymore. It all started a few months ago when I moved into my new apartment. It's a small place, nothing fancy, but it's mine. I was excited to finally have a space of my own, even if it meant living on the outskirts of the city, far from my family and friends. The building is old, with narrow hallways and creaky floors, but I liked the charm of it. The landlord told me it had been around since the British colonial days, which made it feel even more special. The first few weeks were uneventful. I was busy with work and settling in, so I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. But then, strange things began to happen. It started with small, almost insignificant things, like feeling a sudden chill in the air, even on the hottest days, or hearing faint whispers late at night, just as I was drifting off to sleep. I would wake up with a jolt, heart pounding, but when I looked around, there was nothing there, just silence and darkness. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination, maybe the stress of living alone for the first time. But as time went on, it became harder to ignore. The shadows started to appear. I'd see them out of the corner of my eye, flitting across the room or hovering in the hallway. Whenever I turned to look directly at them, they would vanish, leaving me staring at empty space. It made no sense. Shadows didn't just move on their own. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the old building settling, or the lights playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just my mind, tired from long days at work. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was something wrong with this place, something I couldn't explain. The worst part was that I started to feel like I wasn't alone. Even during the day, I'd catch glimpses of those shadows in the bright sunlight, creeping along the walls, lurking in corners. It was like they were watching me, waiting for something. I began to feel uneasy in my own home, the one place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. One night, I was lying in bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. The room was dark, but I could feel it, the presence of something else, something I couldn't see. My heart started to race, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself that it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I heard it, a soft, almost inaudible whisper, like someone was speaking right into my ear. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was angry. I bolted upright, my eyes scanning the room, but there was nothing, just darkness and the faint outline of furniture. But I knew I wasn't alone. The shadows were there, surrounding me, closing in. I could feel their coldness, their anger, pressing in on me, suffocating me. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I grabbed my phone and fled to the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, the lights on, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But even then, with the lights on, I could see them, the shadows lurking just beyond the edge of the light, waiting for the darkness to return. I don't understand what's happening to me. I've tried talking to my friends about it, but they just brush it off, telling me I'm working too hard or that it's just the stress of living alone. But they don't see what I see. They don't feel what I feel. I'm scared. I'm scared that I'm losing my mind, that I'm seeing things that aren't really there. But what if they are real? What if these things are something more than just tricks of the light? I don't know what to do. I don't know how to make it stop. I don't know how much longer I can take it. I just want it to stop. I'm trapped. I just want to be safe in my own home again.